Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says follow SOP in crimes against women. There was an advisory that was issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs to all the state governments in India. What is this advisory? Basically, in case there is any sexual assault or there is a sexual violence or a committal of rape against a woman, there is a fixed standard operating procedure that the police departments have to follow. So the Ministry of Home Affairs is requesting the state governments, asking them to tell their police departments to follow this standard operating procedure. Let's try and understand what is this standard operating procedure is all about. We have the recent incident, and that happens to be the Hatharas gang rape case. What is this all about? There was a 19-year-old woman. She was allegedly gang raped by about 4 men. She was shifted to the hospital, and as she faced all the complications, she also gave a dying declaration. What was this dying declaration? She said that there were about 4 men who had committed an act of rape on this very woman, and she passed away giving this dying declaration. But the police actually say that there was no evidence of rape as per the forensic examination. In this particular backdrop, what is the standard operating procedure? It speaks about the dying declaration. It speaks about section 173 of Code of Criminal Procedure and the concept of zero FIR. Let's try and understand what is the standard operating procedure that the police department will have to follow in case there is any sexual assault or there is an instance of rape committed against the woman. The first important concept is what is called as the dying declaration. What is this dying declaration? Basically, this is assumed to be trustworthy and credible evidence that is given by that person who is about to pass away. So this whole idea of dying declaration is simply based on the principle that most of the people who actually die do not lie when they are dying in that particular instance. Why is this considered? That is because here the person that is the victim is the only eyewitness to that particular crime, and the exclusion of this particular treatment or this very act or the statement would ultimately mean that justice would not be delivered to that person. So what we have here is the dying declaration given by that particular victim in that particular circumstance. So this can be used as a tool or a statement for the future investigation. So what we have is very important factor of dying declaration that has to be considered for the future course of investigation. But unfortunately, it was not considered in the Hathras gang rape, and the police have now alleged that there was no instance of rape on the basis of forensic examination is what we have to consider. So a person who makes any dying declaration must, however, be competent at the time of giving this particular declaration. It cannot be a lunatic person, it cannot be person not in conscious state, but if that person is conscious enough and if he is making the right statement and if he is competent enough to give, this statement will have to be considered as a dying declaration. Where do we have it in the laws? We have to look at section 32 of 1 of the Indian Evidence Act of 1872. It clearly provides that any statement, whether it is written or verbal, by a person who is dead shall be treated as a relevant fact in the investigation when the statement is made by a person or the cause of his death or to any of the circumstances of the transaction which resulted in his death. So it clearly says that we have a law called as Indian Evidence Act. We clearly have a section called as section 32 of 1 which identifies that in case there is a dying declaration, that has to be taken by the police in the future course of investigation, which is what the law is all about. Then we also have the Supreme Court judgment which clearly goes on to support this very act as well. In the Purushottam Chopra versus the state, that is the government of NCT Delhi, we have the Supreme Court also accepting this very section of the Evidence Act. What does the Supreme Court say? Let's say for example there is a person on the deathbed and he has given a dying declaration. This dying declaration cannot be rejected simply because this was not recorded in front of the police officer, simply because it was not recorded in front of the magistrate. So this dying declaration cannot be rejected even if there is no presence of the police officer or the magistrate, but we have evidence that this dying declaration was given by that person via a video as well. There can also be another instance as well. Let's say, for example, it is usually said that I have to give an attestation or a signature or a thumbprint, but in case there is a person on the deathbed, if they are not able to give the attestation, even then their viewpoints, their dying declaration will have to be considered, as the future course of evidence is the first important factor. So according to the Ministry of Home Affairs, it clearly goes on to say that we have the Indian Evidence Act of which provides that any statement made via orally or by a written person who is now dead shall be treated as a relevant fact for the future course of investigation. So it is asking the state government to implement this very policy of considering and giving value to the dying declaration. This is the first part of the standard operating procedure. The second is about section 173 of Code of Criminal Procedure. What is this all about? We have the Ministry of Home Affairs which has reiterated that we have section 173 of the Criminal Procedure Act. What is it? Let's say, for example, there is a heinous act of rape that is committed on a woman. In this particular case, who does the investigation? It is the police officer. The police officer and its department personnel will have to make sure that this investigation is conducted within a period of 2 months. So they have to fast track it and they have to provide all the investigating details to the magistrate so that the court can take upon this particular proceedings. So what we have to understand is that this particular introduction happened in the Criminal Act of 2018. So kindly remember, there has to be fast tracking of the investigation and this has to take place within 2 months in order to facilitate the state police, in order to make sure that there is compliance with it, in order to make sure that there is constant monitoring of this particular case. What we require is a tool, and that tool is what is called as investigation tracking system for the sexual offences. What is this basically? This is a tool that is given to all the police officers throughout India. This is given at the national level, this is given at the state district level, and to police stations all over India as well. So what will happen? The state would be able to identify the progress of this particular incident. Let's say there is a case of rape. In this particular case of rape, what has been the progress? Are they working really? What exactly is the gradual process taken? What are the different identifications? What is the different evidences? That which is collected by the police will be constantly updated in this particular tracker. So kindly remember, this is one of the measures that is developed by the Ministry of Home Affairs towards smart policing. This is available exclusively to the law enforcement officers, and this happens to be the part of criminal tracking network systems, which is simply called as the CCTNS. The third important procedure is what is called as the zero FIR. Let me simplify this concept for you. Whenever there is a crime that is committed, what exactly happens? There is a scene of crime that is committed. Let me give you an example. Let's say we have Patel Nagar in Delhi, or let's say there is Karol Bagh or Rajendra Nagar. When there is an act of murder committed in Patel Nagar, there will be a police station in Patel Nagar where this particular case will be registered. But this case cannot be registered, let's say, in Karol Bagh. But what is the concept of zero FIR? This happened after 2012. What exactly happened? We have the heinous act of rape that was committed against a woman. In this particular case, this was a rape that was committed in a moving bus. So ideally, there is not one single region where this act of murder or rape was committed, but instead it was on a moving bus. So it can be in one region, it can be in another region, or it can be in another region as well. So in this particular case, there was FIR which was rejected by multiple police stations. Why? They said that this particular case does not belong to their jurisdiction. So that is when the recommendation of the Justice Verma committee comes into picture. What is this all about? Let's say there is an heinous act of rape, but that particular victim who's gone through this heinous act does not know where to actually file this application or the FIR. So she can file this particular FIR in any of the police station, not only with respect to that jurisdiction. So she need not have to file only in that particular region where the rape has actually occurred, but instead she can file in any any of the police stations in that particular area. So what should the police officer do? They immediately have to take this particular case, and in case they feel that it does not belong to their jurisdictional police station, they will have to forward the same to a different police station. Earlier, what we had was that only jurisdictional police stations had to accept this particular norm, but now what we have is the concept of zero FIR. So irrespective of where that particular crime has taken place, any police station is where this victim can go up to, and they can file a case of rape as well. That is the concept of what is called as zero FIR. So kindly remember, this came after the year 2002 as per the recommendation of the Verma Committee. So the law enables the police to register FIR where any police station, irrespective of the location of the incident or jurisdiction, has to accept it. Then the FIR will later be transferred to the jurisdictional police station to conduct the future course of investigation. This is what has to be done when it comes to the zero FIR. Then we have one of the important sections called as section 164A of the CRPC. What is it? Let's say, for example, there is a rape or there is a sexual assault. In this particular case, the women will have to be taken to a registered medical practitioner with the consent of that particular victim, and they will have to receive all the information about that particular incident relating to the commission of the offense. So what happens? There is a victim who's gone through this particular crime. They have to go to this particular hospital where there is a registered medical practitioner. They have to take the consent of the victim and only then conduct all the medical practices, and all the medical information will have to be collected, and the same will have to be given to the police officers. That is what is section 164A of the CRPC. Then the Ministry of Home Affairs has also asked all the state governments to adhere to the guidelines issued by the Directorate of Forensic Science Services for the collection, for the preservation, transportation of the forensic evidence in any sexual assault case, which means they have also given what is called as the sexual assault evidence collection kits. This collection kits will have couple of equipments. This will have couple of data that they have to store, and this will have to be given to the police personnel for the future course of investigation. All this is the standard operating procedure which the state governments will have to tell the police officials, will have to tell the police departments to comply by in the future course of action. So going forward, all the standard operating procedures will have to be implemented. This includes compulsory registration of FIR in cases of cognizable offences, including sexual assault. So what is a cognizable offence? In case there is an act of murder, in case there is an act of rape, in all these cases, the police personnel need not have to take the permission of the magistrate for arresting that accused. That is what is called as cognizable offence. For you to understand whether it is a cognizable offence or a non-cognizable offence, we have Schedule 1 in the CRPC, which clearly says what is a cognizable offence and what is not a cognizable offence. Then we have something called as collection of evidence for forensic examination, use of sexual assault evidence collection kit, completion of investigation in sexual assault cases within 2 months, and use of national database on sexual offenders for identifying and tracking repeat offenders. So these are the procedures that has to be followed, says the Ministry of Home Affairs, to all the state governments, and it is requesting the state governments to ask its police personnel to follow all these procedures laid, so that in the future we do not have repeated actions against the women. So what we have to understand in this particular backdrop is that we have all the stringent laws that which has been laid for the women's safety, but in case there is a process, in case there is a violation of this investigation protocol, then what we have to make sure is that stringent action is taken on the police officer in case there is any violation of the law when it comes to the investigation process. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about genome editing. It is also called as gene editing as well. Why are we discussing this? That is because the Nobel Prize for the Chemistry for the year 2020 2020 has been given to these two scientists who have accomplished something great when it comes to the field of chemistry, and that is in reference to the genome editing. What is this genome editing? Basically, this is one of the technology where the scientists would have the ability to change an organism's DNA. These technologies allow the genetic material either to be added, to be removed, altered at a particular location in that particular genome. Before we understand in greater detail what is the tool used for genome editing, we have to understand some of the basic concepts. What are these basic concepts? First, let us try and understand what is a DNA. DNA simply stands for what is called as the deoxyribonucleic acid. So DNA is nothing but a material that carries all the information about that living being, whether the looks of it, the functions of it, all will be determined by this DNA. This DNA has a very complex structure. It is made up of chemical substances that are linked together like a chain. So as you see in the picture, this is linked together like a chain, and each piece of DNA has two long strands. These two long strands are what is called as chain in a simple language. The bases always pair together. So what is it? We have the adenine always pairing with the thymine. We also have the cytosine which always pairs with the guanine as well, and these are connected together by what is called as the hydrogen bond. So each base pair is joined together by what is called as the hydrogen bond. Now we have to understand that DNA is nothing but all the information that with respect to a person is present in a DNA. But we also have to know the difference between gene as well as the DNA. A DNA is this entire complex structure, but a part of the DNA is this gene. So a gene is a sequence of a DNA or a RNA that codes for a molecule that has a function. The transmission of genes to an organism's offspring is the basis of inheritance of phenotypic states. So kindly remember, the entire structure is what is called as DNA, but a part of it is what is called as the gene. So when it comes to the gene, it is a part of the DNA. So what is the difference between a gene and a genome? A gene is a segment or a portion of a DNA molecule, but a genome is the total DNA content in that particular cell. Now that we have understood all these basic information, let's try and understand what is the tool used by these scientists. That tool is what is called as the CRISPR or Cas9 genetic scissor. What is this CRISPR? It basically stands for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. We have something called as Cas9. What is this Cas9? This is nothing but an enzyme that would be able to cut a part of the DNA. So we have the bacteria which usually fights off the virus by sending this Cas9 enzyme to chop off the viruses when it enters their body. So basically, when we are speaking about these two CRISPR Cas9, it is nothing but a system which allows for adding, altering, deleting the genomic code in that particular living being. How does this basically work? Scientists usually start off with what is called as the RNA. So what is this RNA? This is what will help us get the genetic information in the DNA. So what will the RNA do? It will find out the spot in the nucleus of a cell where some editing activity with respect to that DNA has to be taken up. So we require the RNA to actually show us the part as to where the DNA is actually having some mutation. So this will guide what is called as the enzyme CSA9, and this CSA9 will be used as a scissor to cut a particular gene and insert a new gene where there is a problem in that particular DNA. So let's say for example, this is a long strand of the DNA. So there is a small problem in this particular region. So what we will have is this particular enzyme called as Cas9, which will be used as a particular scissor, and it will chop off this spot which is actually having a problem in that particular DNA. So what can also happen is it can set it aside, or we can also have a new DNA which can be inserted in this particular part of the DNA where there is an issue with respect to a specific gene. That is what is called as gene editing. So what are we doing here? There is a particular gene sequence in the DNA, and this gene sequence has some particular problem. So we are replacing or removing through this particular scissor called as Cas9, and using this entire process, that is what is the discovery made by these two scientists. So kindly remember, whenever there is a mutation or whenever there is an issue with respect to the gene, this particular technology can be used, and the same can also be implemented going forward to remove certain issues and mutations when it comes to the DNA. Now what we have to understand is some of the advantages with respect to the gene editing technology. The patients with beta thalassemia and one with the sickle cell disease would no longer require blood transfusion after their bone marrow cells were edited using the CRISPR technique. And we have also had researchers who have used this to fix genetic diseases in animals, to combat viruses, and also to sterilize mosquitoes as well. These are some of the advantages when it comes to this technology. But there are some constraints and concerns as well. What are these concerns? When it comes to the humans, we have been manipulating the genetic code, and these manipulations get passed on to the future generation as well. Let me give you an example. Let's say we have conducted a particular gene editing technology, and we have also infused that particular technology into a person, but we don't know what could be the repercussions that could happen to that particular person. There are also instances where a couple of studies have also said that this can possibly result in cancer as well. So what are we doing here? Because we assume that we know everything that is happening within that particular person, but that is not so. So what could happen is the entire generation from that particular person to the future generation can result in what is called as the health side effects because of it. And studies have also shown that this can also result in cancer if it is not properly administered to that particular person. So these are some of the concerns with respect to this technology. However, CRISPR-Cas9 system allows a democratic usage in labs across the world. It has been successful. It has been able to prove things as well when it comes to the medical sciences. But going forward, we will have to be cautious. We will have to increase the level of precision, and in case there are unintentional side effects, they will have to be monitored, evaluated, and periodically updated, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Mullaperiyar Dam issue. What is this Mullaperiyar Dam issue all about? First, let us understand some of the key important facts. It is a masonry gravity dam on the Periyar River in Idukki district of Kerala. So the dam is situated at the confluence of the Mullayar River and the Periyar River, and that is why it is called as Mullaperiyar. The Periyar National Park in Thekadi is located around the dam's reservoir. Kindly remember, the dam was built in late 1800s in the princely state of Travancore, which is the present state, that is Kerala, and given to the British ruled Madras Presidency on a 999-year lease in the year 1886. This agreement was again renewed in 1970. Tamil Nadu was given the rights when it comes to the management of the land and the water from the dam, as well as developing hydropower project at this very site as well. In return, Kerala would also be provided rent. Why? Because it is Tamil Nadu which is actually managing the water, it is actually managing the land, so it is paying some rent to the state of Kerala. The dam might be located in the state of Kerala on the river Periyar, but it is operated and maintained by the state of Tamil Nadu. What is the purpose of this dam? Basically, when you look at the geography of the Periyar River, it is a west flowing river. So ideally, it has to end up in the Arabian Sea. But since we have constructed the dam, it is diverting the water towards the eastern region, and ultimately it flows into the state of Tamil Nadu. So we have all these deficit regions where water is currently less, and it will serve the purpose in the region of Madurai. It will serve the purpose in the region of Shivaganga and Ramnath districts as well. So all these regions currently are arid rain shadow region, and currently because the water is diverted, that is why all these region gets the water supply from the Periyar Dam. So kindly remember, this particular water can be used for the drinking purposes, it can be used for the irrigation purposes, and also for generation of power in Lower Periyar power station. What is the controversy all about? As we initially discussed, this is in the state of Kerala, but this is being controlled by the state of Tamil Nadu. What Kerala says, that since it is being controlled by the Tamil Nadu government, they have to make sure that the dam safety is kept intact. Why? Because in case there is a serious crisis, it is the people of Kerala who will suffer the major losses. This can be in terms of economy and also in terms of human lives as well. What does the Kerala government say? It says that Kerala government has no objection to give water to Tamil Nadu, but their main cause of objection is with respect to dam safety. Why there is dam safety issue? That is because since this was constructed couple of years ago, this has resulted in leaks and cracks in this particular structure. So what it is requesting Tamil Nadu government is, let's destroy it, let's build up a new one, and in case we are constructing a new one, then the same amount of water can also be diverted to the state of Tamil Nadu. So it is requesting and asking the state of Tamil Nadu to make sure that the dam safety in this particular region is intact. Then we have the Idukki district where this dam is located. This is an earthquake prone area. There have been previous instances as well where multiple low intensity quakes have struck this very region as well. So the dam is situated in a seismically active region. So a 2009 report by the IIT Roorkee also said that there is a possibility that in case there is a magnitude of 6.5 on the Richter scale that strikes this particular region, it can have a devastation to the entire region. So it poses a lot of danger to life and property, to the people living downstream, and there will be millions of people who will be impacted by it. That is what the Kerala government is saying. So what is the controversy here? The total height of this particular dam is about 176 feet. What is the permissible amount of water that can be stored? It is about 152 feet. Back in the year 2006, the Supreme Court allowed the Tamil Nadu government to raise the water up to 142 feet. But this has been resisted by the Kerala government. In fact, the Kerala government passed what is called as the Kerala Irrigation and Water Conservation Amendment Act of 2006. According to Kerala, they passed a particular legislation where they said that Tamil Nadu government will not be able to raise water beyond 136 feet. But what has the Supreme Court said? The Supreme Court said that they would be able to raise water up until 142 feet. But Kerala government passed a legislation where they said that since it is in the state of Kerala, you the Tamil Nadu government cannot raise the water limit beyond 136 feet. That is when Tamil Nadu government approaches the Supreme Court of India. Why? Because this is an order given by the Supreme Court of India, and how can, when there is a dispute between the state of Kerala, between the state of Tamil Nadu, how can unilateral decision be taken by the Kerala government? That is why Tamil Nadu government approaches the Supreme Court of India. So the Supreme Court of India looks into this particular case and it says that this particular law passed by the Kerala government is unconstitutional. Why? Because the Mallaperiyar River is a dispute between two states. In such disputes, a single unilateral decision taken by Kerala is unconstitutional, says the Supreme Court of India. So it allowed the Tamil Nadu government to raise the water once again. What is Tamil Nadu speaking about the dam safety? Tamil Nadu government has clearly said that they have been conducting periodic safety repairs. They have strengthened the dam as well. There will be no threat to the people and tremors will not be felt in this particular region. Even if it is felt, it will be very minor and there will not be any damages, says the Tamil Nadu government. And at the same time, they also have to look at the water for the Madurai region, for the Shivganga region as well. So that is where they say that if this particular water is not stored up to 142 feet, they would not be able to provide water for the drinking purposes, irrigation purposes, and that is why Tamil Nadu government is not listening into it. So back in the year 2014, the Supreme Court appointed what is called as the Supervisory Committee to monitor this whole issue between the state of Kerala as well as Tamil Nadu. So this committee shall inspect the dam periodically. It will also suggest if any measures have to be taken, and appropriate measures, necessary directions will be issued both to the state of Kerala as well as to the state of Tamil Nadu. But this is where the present context is. What is the present context? Office bearers of the Panchayat in Kerala have expressed apprehensions about the lack of supervision when it comes to the supervisory committee. They say that this supervisory committee is not working and there are issues with respect to its implementation. They are not critically analyzing this particular issue, and this could be a major threat when it comes to the state of Kerala. In response to the allegation made by the Kerala Panchayat, Tamil Nadu government has rebutted these allegations and has said that this supervisory committee is working intact and all the allegations made by the Kerala Panchayat is wrong, says the Tamil Nadu government. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about lesser flamingos. So kindly remember, when it comes to the lesser flamingos, it is a species of flamingo which is usually occurring in sub-Saharan Africa and northwestern India. And these lesser flamingos have been reported extensively in the region of Mumbai, and that is because of the presence of wetlands in this particular region. But however, of late what we are witnessing is loss of wetlands, and as a result there is increasing pressure on the lesser flamingos. So what is the major issue? There was about 2000 hectares of wetland, and all these wetlands have now been diverted for the Navy Mumbai International Airport as well as JNPT expansions as well, and as a result there is a shrink when it comes to the wetland area. Then we have another area called as the Uran wetland. This is spread over across 500 hectares, and this is an important region for the migratory bird roosting as well. But of late migratory birds are not visiting them. That is because of aggressive debris and mud dumping in this very region. So what is this article saying now? The article currently says that Mumbai had large areas of wetland, and now we are seeing a shrink when it comes to the area. So we have the Thane Greek Flamingo Sanctuary, which has been the last resort for about 1.5 lakh birds which concentrate here now. The other areas have either been diverted or it has become excessively polluted as well. So going forward, we require the government, we require the NGOs, we also require the private sector and the civil society all come together, take active measures to make sure that the wetland concentration in this particular area is enhanced and it is not crunching. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into some of the practice questions. Mallana Sagar Reservoir is part of, is it Kaleshwaram Irrigation Project, Mandal Dam Project, Renuka Multipurpose Dam Project, or Sulwade Jampal Kannoli Lift Irrigation Scheme? The answer to this is Kaleshwaram Irrigation Project. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, this article makes an analysis of the dam construction and the losses suffered by the people as well. What exactly happens whenever there is a construction of a dam? What we actually have is that this region in and around the dam will also be taken by the government. Why? Because this could result in flooding in this particular region and people will also bear the brunt of it. So what will usually happen? They will be rehabilitated or they will be given money as the compensation. But the main issue is this money or the compensation given to these type of people usually comes with a lot of delay. Since it comes with a lot of delay, they would not be able to buy the land in some other region, and as a result these people are the major sufferers, says this particular article. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following are correctly matched? Namdapha Tiger Reserve, Arunachal Pradesh; Fulveri Ki Nal Wildlife Sanctuary, Rajasthan; Sita Mata Wildlife Sanctuary, Gujarat. Which of them are correctly matched? The answer to this is 1 and 2 only. Why? Because the Sita Mata Wildlife Sanctuary is again in Rajasthan. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, when it comes to Fulwari Ki Nal Wildlife Sanctuary, it is located in Udaipur district of the state of Rajasthan in southern Aravalli Hills. The climate in this particular sanctuary is semi-arid with an annual rainfall of about 730 mm. And when it comes to Sita Mata Wildlife Sanctuary, this is once again situated in Pratapgarh and Chittorgarh districts of Rajasthan. So kindly remember these important facts. It further makes a mention of some species which have been identified, but this is not that important. But kindly go through this article as well, because we never know what UPSC can come up with and surprise us. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to Cinderella yellow vein clearing virus, which of the following statements is or correct? The virus was isolated by researchers from a plant named Cinderella nodifera, and it was able to infect tobacco and tomato plant. This virus is a representative of Bigomovirus family of viruses. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is both. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, this is one of the virus which can harm the plants. Where was it discovered? It was discovered on Cinderella nodifera plant, and it also harms tobacco as well as tobacco plants as well. How does this work? Basically, when you look at this particular image, this is not infected by the virus, but when it comes to the infection, what you actually witness is go through the vein, and what you will have is different colors when it comes to the infection. So when it harms that particular plant, what we actually witness is that this particular plant will not be able to produce flowers and fruits in the near future. So kindly remember, whenever there is an attack by the virus on this particular plant, the plant also gives a response as well. That response is the defense mechanism of the plant. So what exactly happens? The plant targets a protein called as beta C1, which is made by the virus, which helps in successful infection and intracellular movement within the plant. So the plants degrade this beta C1 protein of the virus by tagging this protein with another smaller protein called as ubiquitin. So this will obviously mean that plant also has some defense mechanism. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to International Monetary and Financial Committee, consider the following statements. IMFC discusses matters of concern affecting global economy and advises the International Monetary Fund on the direction of its work. The World Bank participates as observer in IMFC meetings. Which of the statements above is or correct? The answer to this is both the statements are correct. Now let's look into the mains practice question. As sexual violence continues to plague our nation and destroy lives, discuss the mandatory measures that have to be taken in cases of crime against women. CRISPR Cas9 gene editing technology, a boon or a bane? Critically examine. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, come up with constructive criticism. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.